I remember the way my heart hitched the first time I saw him. The beam from my headlights caught the reflective stripes of his uniform, the sharp metal of his belt, the rigid line of his posture. But where his face should have been, there was only a blank, pale void. Not a blur, not a shadow, just nothing. I blinked, and the white of it seemed to pulse faintly, as if it breathed in rhythm with the highway itself. I should have driven on. I should have screamed. But my foot stayed on the brake, cold fingers gripping the steering wheel as my pulse rattled in my ears. The road around me, empty, stretching into a black infinity, shifted subtly, the horizon tilting just enough to make my stomach lurch. The line of yellow paint in my lane wavered like water in my headlights. I said, voice thin and uncertain. The officer didn't answer, not with words. There was only the hum of his presence. The night around him thickened, the air heavier, as if the headlights themselves hesitated to illuminate past his shoulders. I looked around the highway, desperate for something to anchor me. A sign, a reflective marker, another car. Nothing. Only the asphalt, slick with shadows, stretching under a sky that had swallowed the moon. The radio flickered. Static first, a low hiss that whispered against the glass of the windshield. Then, just for a second, I thought I heard a voice. Faint, fractured, and yet painfully familiar. A child laughing. My own laughter, maybe from a memory I couldn't place. "You're speeding," I managed to say. My own words sounded absurd, brittle, and too small in the stillness. The faceless officer tilted his head slightly, an impossible motion, subtle enough that I almost missed it. The smooth plane of his face caught a stray beam, and for a moment it felt like looking into a mirror, one that reflected not me, but every choice I'd buried, every guilt I'd ignored. The hairs on my arms stood on end, prickling with recognition I couldn't yet name. I reached for the glove compartment, thinking of my wallet, my license. But even that movement felt wrong, weighted, slowed by a pressure I couldn't describe. The air smelled of dust and something metallic, the faint copper tang of old blood, or maybe memory, or fear itself. I remembered, came not as a thought but as a jolt. Rain, the smell of wet asphalt, tires screaming as they slipped on a curve I had taken too fast. My father's car, my hand gripping the wheel, his voice in my ear, tense, worried. And then the crash, the flash, the scream that never left me. I had buried it under years of work, commuting, distractions. A memory pressed deep enough to almost forget, yet alive enough to whisper across decades. The faceless officer leaned forward slightly, and the world shifted again. The roadside trees stretched taller, thinner, as if the dark itself were drawing in toward me. The lines of the road fractured. The dashes in the centerline lengthened, then contracted, matching some rhythm I couldn't name. I checked the rearview mirror, expecting the patrol car to sit there, ordinary, banal, but it wasn't a car. It was just air. The reflection itself was warped, bending around the officer like light bending around gravity. My own face looked wrong, eyes too bright, skin too pale. I swallowed. Static again, low and insistent, filling the cabin like a fog. I could almost hear the echo of tires on wet asphalt, though the road had been dry. My pulse thundered. I gripped the wheel tighter, knuckles white, the faint vibration of the engine under me somehow matching the rhythm of my dread. The officer raised a hand, slow and deliberate. Not to signal me to move, not to stop me, but something else. Something I only realized later. The sign ahead reflected in my headlights. 21. I blinked. I had passed it before, hundreds of miles back, or maybe yesterday, or maybe years ago. The number hung in the air like a statement. Counting down? Counting up? Couldn't tell. My mind grasped at it, and the faceless officer seemed to lean in closer, the smooth plane of his face reflecting not light, but intention. And then I understood. His facelessness wasn't absence. It was a message. It mirrored me, the choices I refused to face, the moments I ran from, the memory I had buried like a stone in a river, thinking the current would carry it away. Every curve of this desolate highway, every reflective sign, every shift in the asphalt. Everything was aligned to make me see what I had avoided. I remembered the exact moment my father's car went over the edge. The misjudged speed, the overcorrected wheel, the sound of metal crumpling, my scream swallowed by rain. The officers on the scene had been faceless to me then too. Faces of grief, of accusation, of inevitability. I hadn't wanted to see them. I hadn't wanted to admit it. I had driven away from that road, and yet here I was, back on the same stretch of asphalt, with the same empty witness standing over me. The officer raised both hands, palms outward, not threatening, not guiding. His presence expanded, and the world itself seemed to tense. The horizon bowed, the trees leaned, the lines of the highway flexed. Every mile marker I passed blurred and reformed. 20, 19, 18. The countdown wasn't for my speed or a fine or a law. It was for me, for recognition, for the reckoning I had deferred. I pressed the accelerator, desperate to escape, and the road tightened, constricting. The faceless figure advanced without moving, a paradox of motion and stillness. My tires hummed against the asphalt, a low, vibrating tone that seemed to echo inside my skull. The radio sputtered one last voice through static, soft and certain. Remember! I slammed my eyes shut. I could feel the car veering slightly, the air pressing from all sides, a force both external and intimate. When I opened them, the officer was gone. The highway was empty again. The night stretched on, black and patient. But the signs continued, numbering down. 17, 16, 15. I understood that the highway had never been mine. It had been a mirror, a corridor designed to make me see. The faceless officer, the distorted trees, the vibrating asphalt. They were not threats. They were messengers. The facelessness was clarity. Look at what you have ignored, and see yourself reflected without excuse. The miles slipped past, and I felt my chest loosen, a slow exhale after decades of holding my breath. The memory stayed, vivid and unyielding, but the weight of avoidance lifted slightly. I did not rejoice. I did not cry. I simply drove. Ahead, the final marker appeared, its reflective paint gleaming with a pale, quiet authority. 1. The officer did not appear, but I felt him in the air, in the bend of the road, in the slight dip of the asphalt. Not watching me, waiting with me. I passed the marker. The road leveled. The headlights illuminated nothing but black. I slowed. The vibration in the wheel eased. The static on the radio softened to silence. And then, for the first time in years, the highway behind me looked ordinary. I exhaled, a whisper that mingled with the night air, a confession without words. The faceless officer had delivered his message. And in that delivery, he disappeared without violence, without fanfare, leaving only a highway that was mine to drive in peace. The final image lingered as I drove into the dark beyond the markers. The road smooth, empty, obedient. The night itself seemed to hold its breath, and somewhere, in the folds of memory and asphalt, the faceless presence waited no longer. I slowed the car instinctively, though the road was straight, unbroken, and empty. The highway stretched under a sky so black it seemed to pull the light from my headlights. Trees lined either side in dense, unreal walls, their branches nodding overhead. I glanced at the sign again. Hometown 5 kilometers. I rubbed my eyes. My thumb hovered over the radio dial. Static, nothing else. My GPS insisted I was hours from the nearest town in a language I barely understood. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe a coincidence of names, a translation error. But the letters were familiar. The familiar green of the sign, the exact font, even the slight curl of the letters on the municipal crest. I knew that shape, those edges. It was home, my home. A chill ran through my chest. Memories I had long buried pressed forward, unwanted and sharp. I remembered the house on Willow Street, the way the sunlight spilled across the wooden floor in the mornings. I remembered the night I left, hurried, head down, refusing to look back. I had driven away so fast I thought I could outrun the past. I had tried to escape what I'd done. I glanced in the rearview mirror. The asphalt behind me stretched straight into darkness, but the faint reflection of lights shimmered oddly at its edges, like the road itself was trembling. I shook my head, gripping the wheel tighter. The car felt heavier, as if the tires had sunk slightly into the asphalt. The next exit sign appeared faster than I expected. 22 kilometers to hometown. My pulse quickened. How could it be counting down? I hadn't passed the previous sign. I hadn't passed any signs. And yet the numbers ticked like a clock measuring my approach. I looked at the mirrors again. The world behind me seemed flatter, wider somehow. The horizon stretched unnaturally, trees leaning outward as if to watch me pass. A thin mist began to crawl along the asphalt. It smelled faintly metallic, not like rain, not like the air I'd been breathing. The windshield fogged at the edges, though the defroster hummed steadily. I wiped it away, but it returned immediately. The road seemed to pulse beneath the tires. I could feel it through the seat, through my chest. Time, I realized with a sinking clarity, was bending around this stretch of highway. My phone vibrated. I ignored it. A message? A reminder? No, I couldn't risk looking. I glanced again at the exit. Hometown, 19 kilometers. I swallowed hard. My hometown wasn't supposed to be here. I was supposed to be far away on this foreign highway, driving to somewhere I didn't even remember registering on a map. But here it was, and it wanted me. A radio station flickered on by itself, static first, then a faint voice. I couldn't make out words at first, just tone, like a lullaby from the dark. My hands shook as I tried to tune it out, but the voice seemed familiar. Not the voice of anyone alive. Not entirely. I felt it in my chest. A half-remembered lullaby, sung to me in the house I'd left, the room I had locked and never returned to. I pressed my fingers to my temples. I had tried to forget it. I had tried to run. The next sign, hometown, 16 kilometers. The fog thickened. I could barely see past the edge of the headlights. Shadows shifted oddly along the shoulder, branches scraping like fingers against metal. Though there was no wind, my heart hammered. I wanted to turn around, to flee the impossible, but the wheel resisted subtly, as if the road itself had weight and memory. When I tried to reverse, the car refused. Forward was the only direction. Forward into this quiet reckoning. Memories I had sealed away bubbled to the surface. I remembered the night my father fell ill, the argument I had with him before I left, the door slamming shut behind me. I remembered my mother crying in the kitchen, calling my name, and my refusal to answer. I remembered a face I had wanted to forget, a hand I had promised to hold but didn't. I had fled my guilt in miles and years, and now the road was dragging it back. Hometown, 13 kilometers. The numbers blinked white-hot in my headlights. The asphalt rippled faintly, as though each meter I traveled stretched and recoiled behind me. I saw my reflection in the passenger window. My own eyes wide, skin pale, the air around me thick and still. Something behind me shifted. Not moving objects, not a figure. Just a presence, patient, watching, waiting. My stomach twisted. I could feel it brushing against the edges of my mind, brushing against the memory I hadn't wanted to recall. I passed the next sign, 10 kilometers. I braked instinctively, but the car slowed only to the rhythm of the road. The headlights cut through fog, illuminating something impossible. The landscape behind me did not match the one I had left. It was familiar, and yet warped. Streets that shouldn't exist, corners that bent at angles no town could naturally form. I glimpsed my childhood house in the distance, the one I had last seen through a rearview mirror years ago, but it was neither near nor far, as if folded into the highway itself. 7 kilometers. The air grew heavier. My ears rang with the low hum of tires on asphalt, the subtle vibration of an engine resonating beyond mechanics. The radio played nothing but static now, but the static carried rhythm. Pulse, heartbeat, footsteps that matched my own. I thought I saw movement in the mirrors, tiny distortions. Light flares where none should be, a reflection of myself that lingered too long after I turned my head. 5 kilometers. The fog began to curl inward, not dispersing, but curling, compressing the road ahead. Trees leaned impossibly close, trunks thick as columns, shadows pooling in deep purples and blues. My pulse echoed in my ears. The numbers on the signs no longer counted evenly. They skipped, reversed, jumped forward. Logic was no longer part of this road. Only inevitability remained. 3 kilometers. My breath fogged the windshield even as the heat tried to disperse it. I reached for the gear shift, hesitant, and the car obeyed with a reluctant shiver. I glimpsed the rearview mirror again. There was nothing behind me, yet the road seemed unfinished. Like a painting left wet, the edges smeared, incomplete. The world was waiting for me to arrive. 2 kilometers. I recognized the curve before the bridge, the slight dip in the asphalt. I had driven over it in another life, another time, and left something there. A memory, a failure, a piece of myself. The road remembered. The road demanded it. My hometown approached not as I had left it, but as it had never stopped being. A locus of everything I tried to outrun, all the reckonings I refused to face. 1 kilometer. I slowed the car fully now. The fog was so dense the headlights barely pierced it. Shapes emerged from the mist. Familiar street signs, familiar fences, the corner store I had bought candy from as a child. And at the center, a single figure stood, small and still. Not a child, not an adult, but the embodiment of my absence, my guilt, my leaving. The figure did not move, but the air around it pulled tight, like the taut string of a violin. I remembered its face, and yet I could not recall it fully. The road itself seemed to lean toward it. The last sign flickered one final time. 0 kilometers, hometown. I pressed the brakes. The car obeyed. Headlights washed over the figure. It dissolved into the mist, leaving nothing but a pulse in the air, a resonance in the asphalt beneath me. The smell of rain, of home, of old wood and summer grass filled the cabin. I was no longer certain which country I was in, which highway, which life. The road behind me was gone, swallowed by fog. Only the stretch ahead remained, taut, patient, inevitable. I realized that the exit had never been a direction. It had been a reckoning, and now that I had arrived, there would be nowhere left to run. Ahead, the mist parted faintly, revealing a mirror image of the town I had fled, perfect in its quiet weight. The street lamps glowed pale and steady. The air smelled of memory, of absence. And I understood, with the slow, certain weight of inevitability, that some roads are not meant to be traveled, but remembered. The night held still. The highway waited, and I drove forward, into everything I had tried to forget, into everything I had always been.